Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. My name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And today we'll talk about the crisis of silence in return to office initiatives. Now, what we're seeing is that CEOs and employees are really at odds over return to office drives. And this tension is growing increasingly. Leaders are not really listening to their teams, and the employee voices are lost in decision-making around return to office, which is really affecting company culture and morale, and leadership needs to respond and listen to employees and show that it's listening to employees for a good culture, to avoid losing talent, and to have high morale. So let's talk about some survey insights. What we're seeing from surveys is a growing, not shrinking, disconnect between employees and leaders. Only 31% of employees feel heard on return to office preferences, according to a survey by Eagle Hills Consulting. It's essential to include employees in return to office decisions. Whenever I work with a company to figure out its return to office policies, we always do surveys and focus groups, and it's pretty shocking to me that as a broad survey shows that only 31% of employees feel heard, because in the surveys that we do after we do the surveys and focus groups, over 90% of employees feel heard, even if they don't agree with the eventual decision. So ignoring their voices and preferences is what leads to employee disengagement and loss of good talent. Workforce clearly demands flexibility. Hybrid work models are key for employees. The worsening labor market that we're seeing doesn't really dampen the desire for flexibility. Nearly half of the workforce may quit over rigid RTO policies, and we're seeing the number increase from 43% to 47% in 6 months, according to the repeated surveys by Eagle Hill Consulting. So we're seeing the number increase, not decrease, over time. So full-time office mandates especially is what risks major staff exodus. Companies like Boeing and Amazon are seeing serious loss of good talent. And flexibility and showing that you're listening to employees is key to retention, even with return to office initiatives. So this leadership employee disconnect is a serious problem. Another survey from CBRE, which is a real estate management company that has a natural incentive to get people in the office, shows that 81% of respondents feel that their leadership is out of touch. And the larger the firm, the more prone it is to misalignment with staff. And no wonder. The smaller the firm, the more flexibility they tend to offer. So we're seeing that smallest firms tend to offer the largest flexibility, medium-sized firms offer medium flexibility, the largest firms offer the least flexibility. And that's what we're seeing, the misalignment. Also, the smaller organizations are better at meeting employee needs. They listen better to employees. They have more effective survey and engagement tools. So with employees, because it's a smaller company, they know their employees, they can survey them better, less formally. They can have informal surveys as well. So this misalignment in return to office is causing a lot of friction. Large organizations in particular need to reassess leadership approaches. Now, what about human resources? What do they think? Less than 50% of employees are eager to return to the office, according to the NORC at the University of Chicago survey of HR professionals. HR highlights comfort with office return varying among employees, with commuting seen as an especially major drawback. So you want to have a good employee incentives for return to the office. Whenever I work with companies, I make sure that we have good employee incentives for return to office. Financial incentives, just paying them more, aren't really enough for addressing RTO. Employees value perks and direct leadership interaction. And we want the perks to especially reflect the kind of concerns that employees are dealing with on an everyday level as they return to the office. Because if you just increase their salary, they're going to forget about it pretty quickly. But if you have specific ways of addressing their concerns and leaders showing that they understand their concerns, that's what employees really value. So loss of flexibility and work-life balance are major concerns, and leaders need to show that they are concerned and are trying to address these worries among employees. So employer efforts and incentives are generally lacking. That's why you want to focus on things that people are concerned about. Commuter benefits is the major thing that they want, because commuting is the biggest challenge. They also don't want, and they're shocked by sticker prices at downtown eateries, so food benefits, various amenities that are helpful for them once they come to the office, like collaboration spaces, because they're coming to the office to collaborate. They're not coming to the office to do their individual head-down work, which is much more effectively done at home. So it's essential to address challenges and costs with RTO for employee engagement. There are a couple of cognitive biases, which are dangerous judgment errors around this, that I want to highlight. The status quo bias shows a preference for models that leaders are comfortable with. It's status quo. So we leaders, anyone has a preference for what they're comfortable with. And leaders are comfortable with models. They tend to be comfortable with models where they were most successful, which is in the office. And there is a reluctance to be flexible around hybrid work and remote work. So this bias leads to leaders clinging to traditional office setups and impedes their ability to really reflect and consider the benefits of hybrid and remote work models. So that's what hinders innovation around flexible work models. Leaders need to recognize and challenge this bias within themselves. Overcoming the status quo bias is crucial for the rapidly evolving modern workplace. Acknowledging the bias is the first step to addressing inflexible policies. So you want to look for a new arrangement and not be stuck to the past. Now, another problem, the cognitive bias, is called the halo effect. So the halo effect is a tendency to view things too positively, even when they don't deserve that positive reputation. It's kind of like a halo on somebody's head. So leaders tend to perceive a halo around the office. They positively look at the office work and they underestimate the benefits of hybrid and remote work. So this is a big problem. It's crucial for leaders to recognize and challenge this bias within themselves to develop more balanced policies and consider the workplace preferences of their employees and the benefits of hybrid and remote work policies, which will lead to more inclusivity and more effective return to office strategies. Let's talk about a couple of case studies that I worked with. One is a mid-sized professional services firm which faced significant employee resistance to its RTO mandate. So we conducted employee surveys to understand their concerns, and looking at their feedback, what we saw is that people really wanted flexibility. So the leadership did flex and bend to their desires to have a more flexible hybrid work model, and as they return to the office, as well as enhance childcare support and flexible hours, which were major concerns, especially among working parents. So these changes led to, despite the return to office, improved morale and productivity, and an increase in turnover rates, which highlights the needs of listening to employees and helping employees feel heard. Again, some employees still didn't like the return to office, but they felt heard. They felt that the employer was actually listening to them and taking steps to address their concerns. Let's talk about a large financial services firm, where a rigid return to office policy led to low employee engagement, and so the leadership was really not aware of the extent of employee dissatisfaction. And they brought me in to help them figure this out once they became aware of it, and we did some focus groups and surveys, which led to a significant gap in perceptions, where employees wanted a lot more flexible work options. So what we did was we combined, again, the return to office with some flexibility and some financial perks like subsidized home office setups and additional paid time off to improve morale while still having lots of in-office time. These changes had the positive impact of a more inclusive work environment, so people felt more included. Employee job satisfaction improved, so the team performance, and so the culture of the firm was also transformed positively. This is an example of how the leadership being adaptable was key to having better morale, better job satisfaction, and better culture. And finally, let's talk about a tech startup. So it had pretty inflexible office-centric policies which harmed their staff retention, and that prompted reevaluation of return to office policies, their work policies, So I worked with them to focus on doing some surveys and interactive focus groups to have a good dialogue with employees. So that really helped staff feel they have input in decision making, and we made some changes with a hybrid work model based on employee feedback, and we had some stock options to incentivize office return for people who are more willing to spend more time in the office. And that performance-based bonuses added to enhance motivation for people, especially people who are willing to return to the office for more time. This improved staff retention and recruitment of new staff. So with the stock options and performance-based bonuses, and the company was positioned as a more competitive employer in the tech industry in the area where it was based, which was not the typical Silicon Valley. So leadership its responsiveness was crucial to retaining talent in this context. So let's talk about the action steps that leaders can take to have a more effective approach to returning to the office. One is a comprehensive employee survey. So have an anonymous company-wide survey to evaluate employee preferences on our return to office and help employees feel heard. And then analyze the survey results pretty thoroughly with key concerns and common themes identified. Then focus group discussions. Hold focus group discussions based on what you find in the survey in order to get at the deeper issues and contextualize what's going on, and also do some more work to help employees feel heard. And then have leadership workshops to train leaders on change management around returning to the office and around whatever interventions you want to introduce based on the surveys and the focus groups. Next, develop a flexible work model. So flexible work model that's based on employee feedback in the surveys and focus groups along with whatever the company goals are. And use insights to align with employee preferences to the extent possible and reasonable given company goals. Have appropriate incentives like financial benefits. I mentioned the stock options for those who are willing to return to the office more and incentivize those. That's a good technique for startups. Maybe a bonus as part of the initial return to office, but focusing more on non-financial perks like commuter benefits, food benefits, childcare benefits, and so on. Communicate these changes effectively across the company. Have open channels for feedback and questions as you're instituting these initiatives, and monitor and adapt to the changes. So continuously monitor the impact of any new interventions that you're making and be prepared to make adjustments to address employee concerns. Foster an inclusive culture in the company. Have a culture that respects diverse work styles and preferences, and an environment where feedback isn't just solicited, but people also feel heard because their feedback is acted upon. And finally, measure the impact and share the successes of whatever policy you have. So share successes with the team to reinforce the positive aspects of this new model. The bottom line here is focusing on the importance of listening. Listening is key to effective leadership, and understand that listening is what leads to business success because you'll get employees invested and have buy-in, have high employee morale and engagement, and decrease employee turnover. Have this listening be a continuous leadership practice, whether it's around return to the office or anything else, and use this feedback to have a supportive and inclusive culture at your company. Create an environment where every employee feels valued and heard. Prioritize open, meaningful dialogue with employees where they feel like they're making a meaningful contribution to the company and where they have psychological safety to say things that might not be fully correct, where they can make mistakes, but they can feel that they are being heard and they can express their opinions even if they eventually disagree with the outcome. Understand and address the diverse employee needs and align your business strategies with the well-being of your employees. All right, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. Please make sure to subscribe wherever you checked out the show and leave a review. It helps others discover the show, and it helps us improve the show.